The laughter around the glittering mansion stopped in an instant. Hundreds of wealthy guests stood frozen as a young maid lost her balance and crashed into the icy blue swimming pool. Crystal glasses trembled in shocked hands. Expensive music continued playing as if nothing had happened, but every heart present knew they had just witnessed something cruel. The billionaire's glamorous fiancée stood near the edge with a satisfied smile, believing everyone would laugh with her. She expected applause. She expected admiration. What she never expected was that one tiny little girl, barely 3 years old, would silently walk toward the pool and do something that would leave every guest speechless, destroy a carefully built reputation, and become the moment that changed countless lives forever. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is more valuable than wealth and that everyone deserves dignity no matter their job, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel. Share this story with someone you care about, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that remind the world compassion still exists. The mansion belonged to billionaire businessman Alexander Whitmore, a man whose name appeared regularly on magazine covers and business news channels. His companies stretched across continents. His charitable foundation funded hospitals and schools, and although he was respected for his success, many people believed his greatest weakness was loneliness. After losing his wife years earlier in a tragic accident, Alexander had buried himself in work. His only daughter had grown up away at boarding schools, and the enormous estate often felt emptier than any ordinary house. When Alexander announced his engagement to Vanessa Carlyle, society celebrated. Vanessa was elegant, beautiful, and came from a wealthy family with excellent social connections. Fashion magazines adored her. Charity galas invited her as their special guest. She knew exactly how to smile before cameras and speak graceful words during interviews. To the outside world, she looked like the perfect future wife for one of the richest men in the country. But inside the mansion, another version of Vanessa slowly revealed itself. She judged people by their clothes. She believed money determined human value. She barely acknowledged the staff who cleaned her rooms, prepared her meals, or cared for the estate. Housekeepers learned never to look directly at her. Gardeners avoided crossing her path. Drivers whispered among themselves that no compliment was ever enough and no mistake was ever forgiven. Among the employees worked 28-year-old Naomi Carter. Naomi had joined the Whitmore estate only 8 months earlier. She worked as a maid, cleaning guest rooms, polishing expensive furniture, arranging flowers, and making sure every corner of the mansion reflected perfection. She wasn't there because she lacked ambition. She was there because life had forced impossible choices upon her. 3 years earlier, her husband Marcus had died in a construction accident while working overtime to save enough money for their growing family. Overnight, Naomi became both mother and father to little Ava, a cheerful child with bright brown eyes and a smile capable of softening the hardest heart. Bills accumulated faster than opportunities. Naomi sold nearly everything they owned before finally finding work at the Whitmore estate. She never complained. Every morning she woke before sunrise, prepared breakfast for Ava, dropped her at the estate's daycare room run by elderly housekeeper Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, and spent the rest of the day working tirelessly. At night, she tucked Ava into bed inside the modest staff cottage on the property, before quietly crying where her daughter could never hear. Many employees admired Naomi because she treated everyone with kindness despite carrying invisible pain. Mrs. Brooks often said that some people polished silver while others polished souls, and Naomi somehow managed both. Alexander rarely noticed individual employees. Running a billion-dollar empire demanded constant travel, endless meetings, and impossible schedules. Yet whenever he crossed paths with Naomi, she always greeted him respectfully without asking for favors or attention. Her quiet dignity reminded him of qualities he thought the world had forgotten. The evening of the annual Whitmore Charity Gala finally arrived. It was the biggest social event of the year. Luxury cars lined the entrance for nearly half a mile. Celebrities, politicians, athletes, and business leaders stepped onto the red carpet beneath sparkling lights. Classical musicians performed beside fountains decorated with thousands of white roses. Every employee had worked for weeks preparing the estate, until it looked like something from a fairy tale. Naomi spent the afternoon arranging desserts near the outdoor pool area, where the final celebration would take place after dinner. She moved carefully between tables carrying silver trays while checking every detail twice. Nearby, little Ava sat quietly coloring pictures under Mrs. Brooks' supervision. Because the gala lasted late into the evening, several trusted employees had permission to keep their children nearby in a secure section of the property. Ava watched everything with innocent wonder. She thought the lights looked like stars that had come down to visit the earth. She thought everyone wearing beautiful dresses looked like princesses. Most of all, she admired her mother. To Ava, Naomi wasn't simply a maid. She was the strongest person in the entire world. As sunset painted the sky golden, guests gathered around the illuminated swimming pool for dessert and speeches. Crystal chandeliers reflected across the calm water, while photographers captured every glamorous moment. Vanessa loved being the center of attention. She walked among guests accepting compliments about her diamond ring, designer gown, and upcoming wedding. Every smile seemed carefully rehearsed. Every laugh sounded slightly louder whenever cameras approached. Then she noticed Naomi crossing behind the guests carrying a tray filled with sparkling drinks. Something about the sight irritated her. Perhaps it was the confidence with which Naomi walked. Perhaps it was the fact that several guests had politely thanked the maid for her service. Whatever the reason, Vanessa decided to remind everyone of their places. As Naomi carefully stepped around the pool, Vanessa deliberately moved into her path. Their shoulders brushed, the tray tilted. Before Naomi could recover her balance, Vanessa gave a subtle but unmistakable shove. Time seemed to freeze. Naomi stumbled backward. The silver tray flew into the air. Crystal glasses shattered against marble. Then Naomi plunged into the swimming pool with a loud splash. Gasps echoed across the courtyard. Her uniform clung heavily to her body as she surfaced, struggling to catch her breath. Broken glass floated nearby while expensive drinks spread across the water. For one unbearable second, absolute silence filled the estate. Then Vanessa laughed. A few nervous guests forced uncomfortable smiles, uncertain whether they should react. Others looked away in embarrassment. Several employees lowered their heads, powerless to defend one of their own. Naomi slowly reached the pool's edge, humiliation burning deeper than the cold water surrounding her. She had spent years preserving her dignity despite unimaginable hardship, and now it felt like it had been stripped away before hundreds of strangers. She wasn't crying because of the soaked uniform. She wasn't crying because everyone had seen. She was crying because she knew her daughter had witnessed everything. Across the courtyard, tiny Ava had stopped coloring. She stared at her mother in the pool. Confusion crossed her innocent face. She looked toward the laughing adults, then back toward Naomi. Slowly, without anyone noticing at first, Ava stood up. "Mrs. Brooks gently called after her, but the little girl continued walking. Her tiny shoes tapped softly against the marble floor. Conversations faded as guests watched the child approach the edge of the pool. She didn't run, she didn't panic. She simply walked with quiet determination until she stood beside the place where Naomi struggled to climb out. Without saying a word, Ava removed her small purple cardigan. She knelt beside the pool. Stretching her tiny arms as far as possible, she offered the sweater toward her soaked mother, believing it could somehow help dry her. The gesture itself was heartbreaking. But what happened next shattered every heart present. Ava turned away from Naomi and looked directly at Vanessa. There was no anger in the child's eyes, only sadness. With innocent sincerity impossible to fake, she softly asked why anyone would push someone's mommy when mommies worked so hard. The question floated through the night louder than any microphone ever could. No accusation, no insult, just pure childhood confusion. Why would someone hurt another person for everyone else to watch? The mansion fell completely silent. Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. She searched desperately for words that wouldn't come. Because there are moments in life when adults hide behind excuses, wealth, status, or influence. But children see only right and wrong. Alexander Whitmore had witnessed everything from only a few steps away. He had seen the shove. He had heard the laughter. And now he watched little Ava trying to comfort the mother who spent every day quietly cleaning rooms others barely noticed. Something inside him broke. He walked directly toward the pool. Without removing his expensive jacket, he knelt beside Naomi and extended his hand. Not as an employer, not as a billionaire, simply as one human helping another stand. Naomi hesitated before accepting. When she climbed from the water, guests noticed Alexander remove his own suit jacket and gently place it over her soaked shoulders. The cameras that moments earlier had photographed luxury now captured something infinitely more valuable: compassion. Alexander looked around at every guest before calmly announcing that respect was the true measure of character, not wealth, titles, or expensive clothing. He explained that the people maintaining the estate were not invisible. They were the reason evenings like this were even possible. His words landed heavily across the gathering. Several guests quietly applauded, others wiped tears. Even employees standing near the entrance struggled to hide their emotions. Vanessa realized the evening had slipped beyond her control. She attempted to laugh the incident away, claiming it had been an accident, but too many people had seen what really happened. More importantly, one little girl had reminded everyone what humanity looked like. Alexander canceled the remainder of the celebration. Instead of continuing with dancing and entertainment, he invited every employee, including kitchen staff, gardeners, drivers, cleaners, and security personnel, to join the remaining dinner inside the grand ballroom. For the first time in the estate's history, servants and wealthy guests sat at neighboring tables. Some billionaires appeared uncomfortable. Others discovered conversations far richer than business negotiations. Naomi remained uncertain whether she even belonged there, but Ava held her mother's hand proudly the entire evening. The child smiled as though nothing extraordinary had happened, because in her mind, loving her mother wasn't extraordinary, it was simply natural. That night, long after guests departed, Alexander reviewed security footage himself. There was no doubt Vanessa had intentionally pushed Naomi. The engagement ring that had appeared across magazine covers suddenly felt heavier than gold. Alexander realized he had nearly married someone incapable of basic compassion. Success had taught him how to recognize profitable investments, but Ava had taught him how to recognize a dangerous heart. The following morning, headlines did not discuss luxury gowns or celebrity appearances. Instead, whispers spread through social circles about the mysterious incident that had abruptly ended the Whitmore Charity Gala. Within days, the truth quietly reached journalists. People everywhere reacted with outrage, yet the story that touched millions wasn't about humiliation. It was about a toddler whose innocent kindness reminded powerful adults of values they had forgotten. Months later, Alexander established a scholarship fund for children of estate employees and expanded educational assistance for working families across every company he owned. Naomi accepted a promotion managing employee relations, helping ensure every worker felt respected regardless of position. Ava grew surrounded not by wealth alone, but by people who had learned one unforgettable lesson from her tiny act of love. Years later, whenever people asked Alexander what the most valuable lesson of his life had been, they expected him to mention billion-dollar deals, global companies, or financial success. Instead, he always remembered a quiet little girl standing beside a swimming pool, offering her tiny sweater to a soaking wet mother, while asking one heartbreaking question no adult could answer. In that single moment, every expensive decoration, every glamorous outfit, and every symbol of status became meaningless beside the extraordinary courage of a child who loved without conditions. The world often celebrates those who stand above others, but history remembers those who choose to lift others up instead. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are not the loudest voices or the richest people in the room. Sometimes they are simply children whose innocent hearts remind the rest of us what it truly means to be human. The next morning, the Whitmore estate felt completely different. The same marble floors shined beneath the morning sun. The same gardens bloomed with perfect rows of roses, and the same fountains flowed peacefully. But every employee sensed that something irreversible had happened. It was no longer simply the place where they worked. It had become the place where the truth had finally been seen. Naomi barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the laughter, the cold water, and the hundreds of faces staring as she struggled to climb out of the pool. Yet those painful memories were softened by another image that refused to leave her heart. She kept seeing little Ava stretching out her tiny sweater, believing with all the innocence in the world that such a small act of love could fix such a big wound. Naomi realized that while adults often measured strength by power or wealth, children measured it by love. When she arrived for work the following morning, she expected whispers, awkward stares, or perhaps even pity. Instead, something extraordinary happened. One by one, employees approached her. The head chef hugged her without saying a word. The elderly gardener removed his cap and thanked her for remaining kind despite everything she had endured. The security guards, who rarely showed emotion, quietly applauded as she entered the staff entrance. Mrs. Brooks couldn't stop crying. She wrapped both Naomi and Ava in her arms and whispered that she had worked at the Whitmore estate for nearly 40 years, but she had never been prouder of anyone than she was of that little girl. Naomi smiled through tears. For the first time since losing her husband, she no longer felt completely alone. Meanwhile, Alexander Whitmore locked himself inside his private office. Stacks of business reports lay untouched across his enormous desk. His phone buzzed continuously with calls from executives, investors, and reporters asking about the previous night's gala, but none of it mattered. Instead, he replayed the security footage again. He watched Vanessa deliberately step into Naomi's path. He watched the unmistakable shove. Then he watched little Ava walking toward the pool. Alexander paused the video on the exact moment the child stretched out her tiny cardigan. He stared at the frozen frame for several minutes. His late wife had often told him that character revealed itself during moments when no reward was expected. Looking at the footage, he realized two people had revealed their true character in a single evening. One had everything money could buy, the other owned almost nothing. Yet only one possessed genuine greatness. Later that afternoon, Vanessa arrived at the estate expecting a private conversation. She wore designer sunglasses, an expensive white suit, and carried herself with the same confidence she always had. She assumed Alexander simply needed time to calm down before everything returned to normal. Instead, she found him waiting in the library. There were no flowers, no apologies. No wedding plans spread across the table, only a small velvet box containing the engagement ring. Alexander spoke calmly, but every word carried unmistakable finality. He explained that trust could survive mistakes, love could survive disagreements, even relationships could survive hardship. But cruelty toward someone powerless revealed a heart he could never spend the rest of his life beside. Vanessa tried defending herself. She blamed stress. She blamed the excitement of the gala. She insisted everyone was exaggerating what had happened. Then she made the biggest mistake of all. She referred to Naomi as just the maid. Those 3 words ended every possibility of reconciliation. Alexander quietly slid the engagement ring across the table. The wedding was over. Vanessa left the mansion furious rather than remorseful. She expected public sympathy. Instead, she discovered that videos secretly recorded by guests had already begun spreading across social media. Millions of people watched the shocking moment. Millions more discussed the little girl's heartbreaking response. Within days, television programs covered the story. Comment sections filled with parents saying Ava reminded them of the kindness every child is born with before the world teaches judgment. Teachers shared the story in classrooms. Churches mentioned it in sermons. Employers used it during leadership seminars. Without intending to, one toddler had started a national conversation about dignity, respect, and compassion. News reporters soon learned more about Naomi's life. People discovered she was a widow. They learned she worked double shifts to provide for her daughter. They found out she quietly donated part of her modest salary to a local food pantry because, as she once explained to Mrs. Brooks, someone else always needed help even more than she did. The public's admiration grew stronger. Letters began arriving at the estate addressed simply to the brave maid. Children mailed handmade drawings of Ava. Teachers sent entire classrooms worth of thank you cards. One envelope contained only $20 and a handwritten note from an elderly widow that read, "I don't have much, but please buy your little girl some ice cream." She reminded me of my granddaughter, Naomi cried as she read every single letter. She insisted on replying whenever possible. She wanted people to know their kindness mattered. Weeks later, Alexander invited every employee into the ballroom for an important announcement. Many assumed he would discuss security changes or new workplace policies. Instead, he stood before them without a suit jacket, looking less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man speaking from his heart. He admitted that although he had built successful companies, he had failed to notice the invisible struggles of many people working closest to him. That failure, he said, belonged to him. He announced immediate raises for every hourly employee. Health insurance was expanded. Education funds were created for workers' children. Emergency financial assistance became available for families facing unexpected hardships. Most surprisingly, he established a new rule requiring every executive, including himself, to spend one full day each year working alongside maintenance, housekeeping, kitchen, and ground staff. Respect, he said, cannot be learned from a boardroom. Sometimes it must be learned while cleaning floors beside the people who do it every day. The employees rose to their feet. The applause seemed endless. Naomi stood near the back holding Ava, who had no idea why everyone was clapping. She simply smiled because everyone else looked happy. Several months passed. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Naomi accepted her promotion as Director of Employee Care, becoming the bridge between management and staff. She worked tirelessly to ensure no employee ever felt invisible again. Alexander frequently asked for her advice before making decisions affecting workers. He trusted her not because of her title, but because compassion had always guided her choices. As for Ava, she remained exactly the same cheerful little girl. She still collected flowers from the gardens. She still waved at every gardener by name. She still believed every person deserved a smile. One autumn afternoon, Alexander found her drawing pictures beneath the same tree where she often played after daycare. He sat beside her. Ava handed him a crayon. Together they colored quietly. After several minutes, she looked up and asked whether the lady in the pretty dress was still angry. Alexander paused before answering. He told her he hoped that one day she would understand that some people change after making painful mistakes, while others need much longer to learn. Ava nodded thoughtfully. Then she said something Alexander would never forget. She explained that if someone fell into a pool, she would still help them out, even if they had pushed someone else first. Alexander smiled. Children often understood forgiveness better than adults. He silently prayed she would never lose that beautiful part of herself. Nearly a year after the incident, the Whitmore Foundation held another charity gala. Many wondered whether people would attend after the previous year's scandal. The answer came quickly. Attendance doubled, not because of luxury, not because of celebrities, but because people wanted to support an organization that had chosen humanity over reputation. This time there were no separate entrances for staff. Employees and guests walked through the same grand doors. During the evening, Alexander invited Naomi and Ava onto the stage. The audience immediately stood. A standing ovation filled the ballroom. Naomi felt overwhelmed. She had once cleaned these floors after everyone went home. Now she stood before the very people who had once overlooked her. Alexander addressed the audience with emotion. He said that businesses could build buildings, money could build empires. But kindness built legacies. He then announced the creation of the Ava Carter Kindness Scholarship, awarded every year to children who demonstrated extraordinary compassion toward others. The room erupted into applause once again. Naomi looked down at her daughter, who whispered that she didn't understand why everyone kept saying her name. Naomi kissed her forehead and simply said it was because she had reminded grown-ups how to love. If this story has touched your heart, please don't leave without liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with someone who believes kindness still has the power to change lives. Your support helps these inspiring stories reach people who may need hope today. Before we say goodbye, please leave a comment with the words, "Kindness always wins." Let's fill the comments with positivity and remind the world that compassion never goes out of style. Years later, visitors touring the Whitmore estate often noticed a simple framed photograph hanging in one quiet hallway. It wasn't a picture of Alexander signing billion-dollar contracts or standing beside famous world leaders. It wasn't even a photograph from his wedding. because that wedding never happened. Instead, it showed a soaked young maid wrapped in a borrowed jacket, kneeling beside her tiny daughter at the edge of a swimming pool. Beneath the picture hung a small silver plaque that read, "True greatness is revealed not by how we treat the powerful, but by how we treat those who can offer us nothing in return." Every employee passed that photograph each morning before beginning work. Every guest paused to read its message, and every child who visited asked about the little girl in the picture. They all heard the same unforgettable story, that on one unforgettable evening, a billionaire discovered that the richest person in the mansion wasn't the one with the biggest fortune. It was the little girl whose heart was so full of love that she changed the lives of everyone around her forever.